Hello, welcome to my channel, Save Infinity. In this video, I just wanted to kind of briefly discuss the whole idea of like the dead will rise. That you hear people like mention or whatever back in the day, prophecies or what have you, kind of saying one day it'll be like heaven on earth type vibes and the dead will rise. Now, obviously, as always with all these sort of information and content, just take what resonates, leave what doesn't, etc. But this is just like my understanding from like downloads and information and stuff like that I've received, that I've come to see what that could mean and how such a thing like that could work. So really operating from that whole idea of that we're currently kind of view reality from a more like linear, like 3D human perspective, where it kind of follows a very like linear 3D logical sort of timeline, and then also the idea of how our reality is kind of more like a projection, or like a movie scene or what have you, that each scene can like chop and change and be sequenced and kind of created out of thin air, like the double slit experiment type ideas and stuff like that, with infinite possibilities and everything everywhere all at once, and everything kind of coming from within and what have you, and kind of all being all possibilities existing in the quantum field that surrounds us, and then a reality is kind of projected for us. And so, taking those sort of ideas, and that at the moment, a lot of the time, our realities are projected in a way that, still follow that kind of more linear 3D human logic type perspective. So then when someone dies or passes on, then they're no longer showing up in our reality, because, that's like, yeah. But then, also using those other ideas doesn't mean that, there's not a version of them, operating on like another timeline out of an infinite timelines, or operating or existing in like another sort of realm, or in heaven, or with all those sort of multi-dimensional aspects as well. And so for me, my understanding of the dead will rise is kind of more of an idea of the more that human consciousness and stuff expands, and the more we awaken and what have you and things like that, the more we're kind of able to kind of like take off those training wheels of a more like linear 3D logic sort of timeline and perspective, and we can kind of instead of just following that one strict line, we can kind of branch out a little more, and things like once our nervous systems and things like that are able to handle such wild experiences and like choppy like scene changes, if you will, like thinking of reality more like a movie, that a scene's being generated frame by frame. It's like we're then able to have more dramatic jumps in what scenes or what have you can come into play, rather than just following that strict 3D linear logic. And so with all that sort of aspects, and then people expanding more to these sort of understandings, expanding their mind and that sort of stuff, and calming their nervous system and stuff like that to accept such experiences and things like that, would then kind of allow for example, people that have passed on. It doesn't mean that they're completely just non-existent and don't exist anymore at all. Everything's kind of existing in the quantum field and recorded in the Akashic records or what have you, and all that sort of jazz, that they'd then be able to slip back into your field or into your reality from all those different infinite streams, or from like the infinite like heaven within us that kind of projects these things out. It's kind of like they already are still existing in that realm of possibility, but currently we say once a death happens, that means they can't be projected into our reality anymore. Whereas when we have that more expansive view of reality and and integration and what have you, and we go from a more just strict 3D linear path, and we can open up to more like infinite timelines and possibilities and you know, more like dreamlike logic, if you will, then it kind of allows those, you know, characters or people to be able to pop back into our reality even if they had passed on. You know, kind of similar to ideas as well, when, you know, sometimes you hear of people, for example, say like they felt like they saw a passed on loved one, you know, say walking around their home, and then they didn't, like, all of a sudden they didn't see them anymore, and they're like, oh, maybe it was like a ghost or something like that. You know, sometimes as well, you know, my like little theory or what have you is that, you know, that could also just be like a bleed through from another timeline where, say, they didn't pass on, you know, say in this version of the timeline you're on, they did pass, but their consciousness, or, you know, infinite opportunities or whatever have you, kind of split, and so a version of them maybe did pass on the timeline you're tracking down, but maybe a part of them kind of split off, you know, kind of like Harry Potter 9 3/4 vibes. You know, that maybe a part of them kind of split off into another reality that you're not kind of consciously viewing, and so, you know, you can't see them, and, you know, to their knowledge, you know, they haven't died and they're still just operating in that reality. And then, you know, so maybe you come home one day or what have you, and then you see them there in your home or what have you, or kind of like a bleed through from that reality or from the infinite realm of possibilities and quantum field, and then your brain kind of like fixes it up for you of like, oh no, hang on, they've passed on, you know, this shouldn't be possible, this is like a little bleed through, and then it kind of like fixes it all up for you, and they disappear, and then it, you know, appears more like a ghostly presence, if that makes sense. Because our mind and things like that, and our brain and stuff like that, are constantly kind of, you know, filtering and adjusting the reality we see as well, to be able to, you know, make sense, and for us to kind of be able to, you know, perceive the, you know, energetic reality around us in a way that, you know, makes sense and is perceivable for us. So, you know, things like that are, you know, constantly like filtered out or readjusted or rerouted. And so yeah, you know, taking those sort of ideas and concepts is, you know, my, you know, belief and understanding or what have you of how that whole idea of the dead will rise will happen. You know, it doesn't mean literally they're gonna just, you know, be zombies popping up out of the ground, out of their graves or something, or, you know, like literal like dead bodies just coming back to life, but more just from that, you know, holographic quantum type reality idea that, you know, they kind of already are existing in this infinite realm and infinite possibilities, you know, within us. It's just that, you know, their character or what have you has kind of been like cut from the scene, whereas when we kind of expand to a more, you know, multi-timeline, multi-dimensional, you know, infinite timeline, what have you, kind of reality and understanding and way of operating rather than a strict 3D linear, then it kind of allows those characters that, you know, still exist within heaven or the quantum field, or, you know, like within the infinite opportunities within, to be projected however you like to perceive it, can then kind of be, you know, cast back in, if you will. And then our, you know, won't have our brains or minds or whatever filtering it out as an impossibility because it, you know, doesn't agree with our perceived understandings or what have you. It's like reality and things like that can become a bit more flexible in that way, which kind of allows, you know, the dead people, you know, who have passed to kind of, you know, re-enter our field of perception and reality again. But yeah, I'll leave that one there for now. Sending you so much peace, love, light, and blessings as always.